Mm. Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD meeting.
Hi, welcome. In this video, I'll show you how to build a
Sorry,
distributed
the
application.
What is happening?
thing is
For
yeah. I have no idea.
Wasn't that like Pedro's video?
Yes.
Oh,
So I
it
said-
auto-played on you.
Yeah. So,
That's hilarious.
all right. So yeah. So this was Anyway, so Zoom is starting the YouTube channel to make the stream work, and then it auto played the video. All right. So welcome again. It's January the 21st, 2019. Okay. So if you're attending, please put your name on the attendees list in the crypt pad, which is the same every week, but I will put it in the chat anyway. And we need a note taker. Any volunteers? So I can take them, but then someone else has to take over the meeting because like taking both is like slows down things.
I can drive the meeting agenda. I think that it's actually pretty simple.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the main thing that we need to figure out in this one, and sorry to derail like any other sort of actually, so before the end of the meeting, we will do a quick update actually just from everybody. But I just want to get this out in front because we have new OKRs that I want to try to land today. And it basically sort of shifts around a bunch of the priorities for the quarter. So I want to just make sure that we have alignment on that before we move forward. So the main thing is that we're adding 4 OKRs that are basically identical for Go and JS to implement a IPLD selector grammar parser and to implement a DAG traverser for any given selector AST, essentially, the parsed version of those selectors. So if you can give it sort of a block store and say, hey, go give me all the blocks that match this particular selector, and it will go and do that, essentially. And obviously the grammar parser is pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, we basically need these so that we can replicate blockchain data in IPFS, and that's a very important kind of quarterly goal that we need to knock out. So yeah, any particular comments on that? Okay, cool. There's been some discussion in the PR, but it sounds like it's about ready to land. That was the main thing that I was worried about. Next, actually, I'll let Eric go next because by the end of the meeting, I want to figure out how we're kind of staging the work in terms of like what Volker's doing and what Eric is doing. Because it sounds like Eric's been doing some work on a schema engine that sounds somewhat portable to the grammar parser, and Volker's actually been working on the traverser on the JS side. So it sounds like in the Go and JS side, we're actually implementing the 2 different parts, which could complement each other really well. So Eric, you want to go?
Sweet. Yeah, I don't know how much the code will be portable, but at least like my brain state. So I've been doing a lot of research on the schema stuff, and long story short, there is a draft now. So if people want to check that out and make comments, this is a draft that covers all of the basic stuff that we've described in past conversations. So there are types based on the IPLD data model stuff, which, like that list that's been pretty well ratified of the basic primitives. And then it just has product kinds and sum kinds, if you will. So unions and structs, in other words, and maps and arrays. And I've implemented this schema twice, and it is self-describing in both formats. There's now a PR that has an example of this in a JSON syntax and one in a DSL, which is why I've been thinking about parsers lately. The parser for the DSL form is not yet written and tested and complete, but feedback on the DSL before I do that would actually be good. Otherwise, it's just way more work. So there's a PR link in the pad that's shared. And if people want to check that out and make comments, like it's a big old diff. The schema should completely self-describe. So there is a kind that is called like struct, and there is a type in the schema called type struct, which describes what a struct can have. So it reads a little funny. You'll see some JSON elements where it's like the type of the field called type, and like this is what self-description is. So yeah, go check that out. There's a bunch of work bringing that close to being implemented and usable in the Go side already. There's a typed.node implementation, which is still in Go terms the same interface as the other nodes. It's just going to apply more rules. So if you have a type violation, then it will, depending on exactly how you load up the library, either do it in advance when you're putting data in or do it at runtime when you try to access it. Both paths should be supported. And in the far future, I want to have code generation for this, but I won't talk about that today. It's a bit much. Yeah, so that is a bunch of stuff that I don't know what anyone else expected, but I personally thought this was going to take forever. And now it's like suddenly looking a lot closer. So that's just information that I wanted to present to everyone in case it changes your plans. I'm going to start personally dog fooding the schema DSL just to like write documentation for myself for things going forward in new protocols, because if this is close to the mark, then it should be helpful. And if it's not, I want to find out by trying it. So I encourage other people to do that too and tell me what comes up. And yeah, go team.
Volker, you want to do a quick update too?
Yes, so my update is really only I'm still working on the JavaScript IPLD APIs for JS IPFS, but I'm close. There's only 12 tests that are failing on JS IPFS. And then I want to get this merged, but this will be like also like take a while to basically get everything merged and all the stuff. But this is really only the top level API, and then there's the IPLD formats, which I also want to work on. But in parallel, obviously, on the dictor stuff that just came up last week. And basically the update there on the dictor stuff is that I already played with selectors for the past year, and I have like some partial implementations of some things, and just, yeah, dig through them and clean them up, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. Yeah, that's my update. But I have already a thing I want to ask Eric, because so we will do the selectors thing for Go and JS probably. And would you be okay with, like, basically, as you work on the schema stuff currently, that I start on the JavaScript side with the AST parsing kind of things, and then yeah, we work together on basically making sure that it works on both sides. But as I've already spent some time on this, it just makes sense to, I think, if I get started with it, and then we, yeah, I get the feedback from you on does the AST work also for Go, and which should obviously, because it's an AST, but still, yeah.
I was sort of joking earlier, but actually maybe seriously, if you want to try drafting stuff in the schema DSL, or like I'll look at your notes and try to rewrite it again in the DSL, and then we can use that as sort of a sanity check that I'm reading you thoroughly enough and we're on the same page. Might actually be a good
so basically a schema for the AST, right?
Yeah.
Or what are you? Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, the AST is probably pretty simple. I mean, yeah, but yeah, should work. Yeah, I will try it out. Cool.
Yeah, I discovered a lot of bugs in my own schema by writing the schema of the schema, and so I'm thinking like this is just a good exercise in general.
So one thing that would be super helpful, I think, if we can try to have it by the end of the quarter, is at the bottom of the selector spec that Juan wrote, it's a bunch of sort of implementation notes for Go. If those could at some point get replaced with the actual AST definition that's not just like language neutral, that would be really helpful. And then if you want to then link to like a live version of the schema that you wrote, if you end up doing that, then that would probably be helpful too. But yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. Okay. Sweet. That's great. So being that we have so many extra guests here today, why don't I just open it up for some kind of like an office hours? Like any questions from David or Alan or Steven about stuff?
No questions, but I'm here. Well, I didn't have the chance to participate in recent discussions about graphing, so I'm just trying to page in and get an update. The thing that I would like, well, these are more raw thoughts than actually any proposal to make a plan, but I'm starting to think that it would be interesting to consider making IPLD as something that can be used standalone without IPFS. And by that, I mean like making IPLD usable on top of peer-to-peer directly. So that then IPLD can govern the API of the DAG API. That IPFS focus really hard on governing and stabilizing the APIs on files. And peer-to-peer can like focus on, well, the networking part. Again, like this is like very raw thoughts, and I haven't had the chance to write all of these down. But like it seems as a good path moving forward to create what we can then call like stable APIs, without like from the user perspective. Like if an IPFS user comes to IPFS, sees, oh, like these are the files APIs, and I know for sure that like these files APIs will not break, and or they will be backwards compatible, etc. But like everything else, like the internals are not either accessible or claimed to be stable, while the IPD group can like focus really hard on the graph APIs, and govern that without having to go back and forth to an IPFS land. First preliminary thoughts, like what does this sound to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've started to move in that direction at the storage level, right? So like when we're thinking about, okay, we need to traverse a DAG and pull stuff out, we're thinking less in terms of the IPFS API and more in terms of like, what does just a generic block store look like? Or like maybe just an asynchronous get method, like give me like here's a CID, give me a block, right? And then we can map that on top of whatever storage construct. Where it gets a little bit trickier is the network layer API stuff, only because there's so much setup and configuration inside of IPFS today in how it sets up that network and who it's already talking to and all of that, that it's hard for us to think about, oh, okay, let's like create this new replication API, but not take as part of that context and that development, like everything that IPFS is already doing. It's just a little bit more difficult. I would definitely like to get there, but I see it as like a slightly longer term thing, right? Than the storage layer stuff, if that makes sense.
Got it. So, okay, that is, okay. It wasn't as obvious to me that there was a lot of conversations on the storage layer at the moment. Okay. So I guess like it's basically just like people fighting with the interface out of the store stuff.
So this is specifically on the JavaScript side though. And part of this is like, I think one of the reasons why these conversations get lost is because it was also included in some of the very early talks about moving to async await APIs and generators. And like, we were talking about like, oh, well, we want to do an update of our API anyway. Let's make it less IPFS specific and all of that. So yeah, I can see why things got very confused there. Eric would have to speak to, so IPLD in GoLand also has this new API called IPLD Prime. However, I don't know how tied it is to the particular IPFS storage infrastructure. Like I haven't looked at that, but Eric can answer that.
Yeah, I was nodding intensely to the separation of concerns description. Like I've actually been very carefully resisting importing any packages in as much as possible to go IPLD Prime, because my hope is that it's going to be this like intensely reusable thing. And so I want its dependency surface to be absolutely minimal. It should be something that like anyone can put into anything without the slightest chance of a diamond dependency, hopefully. And so it yanks in the SID libraries and nothing else. The rest of it's going to like be decorated on top rather than in it. I'm actually really hoping, like I think in a perfect world, it would be awesome if we could get the IPLD tooling and schemas and stuff to, in addition to serving IPFS's needs really well and Merkle Web in general, it should also scale back. And if you just kind of ignore links, it should work fantastically for the types of single documents. It should like replace Swagger for API docs.
Interesting.
Because it has everything except the HTTP verb, which, yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a bit down road, but like that's kind of where I'm mentally aiming. Like, I have a bunch of other projects, for example, where I'm like doing some message passing over standard in, standard out between a process tree. And like, I want some type system because the parent's in JavaScript and the child is in Go. Don't ask me how that happened. It did though. And like, I basically want IPLD for that too. It would be so useful.
Yeah, I was writing like a distributed MapReduce for some metrics data that we're working on. And I basically needed a cache key, but I needed like metadata associated with that cache key. And I ended up just using DegCbor and storing it in S3 because like that's actually the easiest way to do that, it turns out. So yeah, there's like a lot of uses for all these APIs. The more that we sort of like move them into just think to being really atomic and really kind of small. Also, similarly, in the OKRs for this quarter, actually, it's low priority, but it is in the OKRs for this quarter, is to move IPFS block, the JavaScript API, into the IPLD project, because we actually need that API to do like all of our sort of JavaScript level block interface stuff. And it's not, nothing about it is actually IPFS specific. So.
I don't know if this is exactly the time or place, but from the Go side, so I haven't figured out exactly how to write this, but I suspect part of the solution I might try for Go is, since we have structural typing, you can do this thing in Go where you define the interface in one place and you define it in another place. And if it's the same methods, they're basically equal. You can just toss them back and forth. Mm-hmm. So I'm suspecting there might be a good solution to the dependency ordering problem if I just declare a block interface somewhere in the IPLD project, and then we declare one that's coincidentally identical in the IPFS Go code base, and then neither one of them has to import the other in order to satisfy its type constraints. Like obviously IPFS will import it to compile the full program, but like large amounts of the interface could actually work without the library dependency technically.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty similar to what we had done in the past actually on the JavaScript side. I think that a thing that I would actually like to move towards is away from bigger interfaces and to smaller ones. So for instance, we have a bunch of APIs where you handed an entire block service API, but many of these, like a DAG traverser, only needs to get blocks by CID. And if that's the case, then it should just take a single async method called get that gets blocks by CID. And then you can, you know, it's one line of code to map a block service object onto that, right? But yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, cool. We've only got 5 minutes. So Alan and Steven, any comments or thoughts? No, okay. Cool, okay. One last question, David. I wanted to, in the IPFS project WDG, talk about some IPLD prioritization stuff. What's the best way to add agenda items to the project working group meeting?
So the notes doc is a Google Doc that is open. Like I typically am the one creating the agenda, so I typically am the one presiding, like just copy pasting the template, like adding the date. But like anyone should feel comfortable, like if it's not there already, you should just add it. Let me link it to you. And so you like the calendar event is on Google Calendar. It is also linked from the project working group repo. So like it's kind of like where like just follows a regular patterns. And so, I see you are here. And so the template is already here. Maybe you just copy it. Just have your name and the title of the thing you want to discuss. That's it.
Awesome. I edited it. Also, it said that the meeting was today, but it's not today. It's tomorrow. So I updated that that date.
Yeah, that's wrong.
Cool. Okay, great. I think Volker, anything else before we close it out?
The only thing is that already my work on the new, so to answer David's question earlier, that my work on the IPLD API certainly is to make them less dependent on IPFS and just being like, a toy for IPFS to really have like proper APIs. So that's also part of the API work to make it usable as a standalone thing. Yeah, that's all.
Awesome. Okay. Great meeting, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to go back on U.S. holiday vacation for MLK Day. It's fun. All right. See y'all later. Bye.